You're about to find out which disease has a 90% chance of killing you, and it's not the one you're thinking of. Welcome to Obscura Files. If you're new here, hit subscribe. We go places most channels won't. Now, throughout history, the human body has been the battlefield for some of the most horrifying biological weapons nature ever invented. 200 million dead in a single century, organs that bleed from the inside, brains that dissolve into Swiss cheese, and diseases so strange that even today's scientists stare at them with their mouths open. We're going through the worst of the worst, ranked not just by how many people they killed, but by how they killed them. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll never complain about a common cold again. Let's start with the one that almost ended civilization as we know it, the Black Death. If you had been a peasant in medieval Europe, you would have faced a 2 in 3 chance of dying. Not getting sick, dying. Over 200 million people were wiped from the face of the earth in just a few decades. All it took was one flea on one rat, deciding your straw bed looked comfortable. Within days, your lymph nodes, the little bumps in your neck, armpits, and groin, would swell into enormous agonizing lumps called buboes. Then came the fever, so intense it felt like your blood was boiling. Then the exhaustion, so complete you couldn't lift your arm. Then the skin turning black as the tissue underneath died. Without antibiotics, which wouldn't exist for another 500 years, more than 70% of those infected were dead. But here's what makes the Black Death truly apocalyptic. It spread so fast and killed so many that there weren't enough living people left to bury the dead.
Bodies piled in the streets. Entire villages gone. Erased. As if they had never existed. People at the time genuinely believed the world was ending. And for a huge chunk of Europe, it basically did. Now let's talk about a disease that killed quietly, romantical, and then absolutely destroyed you from the inside. Tuberculosis. By the 1800s, it had killed 1 in every 7 human beings who had ever lived. 1 in 7. Let that number sink in for a second. Imagine it's 1890. You develop a cough. It's annoying, but nothing alarming. A week later, the cough hasn't gone. A month later, you're coughing blood. Your chest burns with every breath. You sweat through your sheets every night. You're exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix. You're losing weight faster than you can eat. And you know that something inside you is being eaten alive. That something is your lungs. The bacteria responsible for tuberculosis don't just infect tissue, they hollow it out. When doctors in that era performed autopsies on tuberculosis victims, they found lungs that looked like blocks of Swiss cheese, riddled with holes, completely destroyed. Without a 6-month course of specific antibiotics, medicine that didn't exist for most of history, 60% of those infected died. Slowly, painfully, completely conscious of what was happening to them. Before we keep going, and things are about to get significantly worse, I want to ask you something. Of all the diseases we'll cover today, which one do you think is the strangest? Drop your answer in the comments. We'll see if you change your mind by the end. Ebola. The name alone makes people uncomfortable, and for good reason. This virus is almost uniquely terrifying in what it does to the human body. In 2014, a man unknowingly ate meat contaminated with the Ebola virus. Within 24 hours, he was experiencing what's called hemorrhagic fever. His blood vessels were rupturing. Blood was leaking from his eyes, from his nose, from his gums. The virus doesn't just infect you, it physically tears apart your blood vessels from the inside. Here's why this happens, and it's genuinely horrifying. Your immune system, realizing something catastrophic is occurring, launches everything it has at the virus all at once. A massive immune response scientists call a cytokine storm. It's your brain essentially calling in an airstrike on your own body. The resulting inflammation and vascular damage is what causes the bleeding. And it doesn't stop there. With a mortality rate of 90%, you have a 9 in 10 chance of not surviving. If you're in that room, those are the odds you're living with. Or rather, not living with. Now, here's one that most people underestimate, but that has shaped human history more profoundly than almost any war. Leprosy. Caused by a slow-moving bacterium called Mycobacterium leprae, it starts innocuously. A pale patch on your skin. A spot that, strangely, has no feeling, no sensation of touch or temperature. You might ignore it for years. But if left untreated, leprosy attacks your nerves systematically. Your hands go weak. Your feet lose sensation entirely. Your facial tissue deteriorates. Over time, and this is not metaphorical, your nose and the tissue around your eyes begin to collapse inward. The deformity is permanent and irreversible.
Throughout most of human history, the social consequence of leprosy was arguably worse than the disease itself. Sufferers were legally and socially declared dead, forced into isolated colonies called leprosaria, often far from civilization, where they would live out the rest of their lives separated from everyone they had ever known. Not because leprosy is highly contagious, it actually requires prolonged, close contact to transmit, but because fear doesn't need facts to take hold. Malaria. If you needed proof that something microscopic can be more dangerous than any army in history, this is it. A parasite, transmitted by the bite of an infected mosquito, enters your blood and travels directly to your liver. There, it multiplies silently for 5 to 10 days. Then it explodes outward into your bloodstream, invading your red blood cells, the cells that carry oxygen to every organ in your body, and destroying them from the inside. The result is waves of fever, chills, and sweating. Then anemia as your red blood cell count collapses. Then seizures, then confusion. And in the worst cases, organ failure as the parasite works its way through your kidney, your liver, your brain. What makes malaria uniquely diabolical from a scientific standpoint is this. The parasite evolves so rapidly inside the human body that researchers still haven't found a way to kill it without essentially poisoning the host. It's been killing human beings for at least 50,000 years, and it's still killing more than 600,000 people every single year. To this day. Right now. Anthrax. Most diseases want to survive. They spread, they infect, they move on. Anthrax is different. Its spores can lie completely dormant in soil for decades, waiting. They need no host.
They need no vector. They just wait. If those spores enter your body through your lungs, which is how weaponized anthrax works, the bacteria that emerge do something uniquely disturbing. Your immune system sends white blood cells to destroy the invaders. The anthrax bacteria survive inside those white blood cells. Then they burst out. The immune cells meant to save you become the vehicle for your destruction. The process repeats, accelerating, until your bloodstream is overwhelmed and your organs begin to shut down. For $9,000, less than a used car, a person with the right knowledge could theoretically synthesize anthrax spores at home. That number isn't speculation. It's been documented. The vast majority of actual anthrax cases today involve animals, not humans. But the potential for weaponization is exactly why governments treat it with such extreme seriousness. Tetanus. Here's a disease that most people in the developed world think of as a minor concern, something your parents worried about when you fell off your bike. It is not minor. The bacteria that cause tetanus live in soil, in dust, in animal manure. They enter your body through the smallest of wounds, a cut, a splinter, a rusty nail in a playground. And once inside, they release a toxin that travels along your nervous system until it reaches your muscles. Then, it locks them. The toxin produced by tetanus interferes with the signals that tell your muscles to relax. Your jaw muscles seize first, which is why tetanus earned the name lockjaw. Then your neck. Then your back. The muscle contractions intensify until your entire spine can arch backward in a single violent spasm.
The pain is described by survivors as unlike anything else in human experience.
Without treatment, tetanus causes the complete and sustained contraction of every major muscle in your body simultaneously. You remain fully conscious throughout. There is no loss of awareness, just unrelenting pain, hour after hour, until the muscles involved in breathing fail. Cholera. What if I told you that something that sounds like a stomach bug has historically been one of the fastest killers known to medicine? In a world without proper sanitation, which describes most of human history, cholera spreads through contaminated water. One sip, that's all it takes. The bacteria travel to your intestines and release a toxin that does one thing with catastrophic efficiency. It forces your intestinal cells to pump water outward continuously, nonstop. Your body literally cannot retain fluid. The result is diarrhea so severe and so rapid that a person can lose liters of fluid per hour. Vomiting prevents you from replacing it. Your blood thickens, your blood pressure drops, your kidneys begin to shut down. In extreme cases, a healthy adult can go from feeling perfectly normal to being dead in under 24 hours. In the 1800s, cholera pandemics swept across continents multiple times. Entire neighborhoods collapsed, cities were paralyzed, and the cruel irony was that the more contaminated the water supply, often from the bodies of victims, the faster it spread. Mad cow disease. This one starts in a field. Somewhere in a peaceful pasture, a cow begins to behave strangely. It staggers, it acts aggressive, it loses coordination. The cause isn't a virus or a bacterium, it's something that challenges our most fundamental understanding of biology. Prions, misfolded proteins. Unlike viruses or bacteria, prions aren't living things.
They're not technically alive at all. They're just proteins, the same proteins your brain uses to function, except they've been folded into the wrong shape. And here's the part that seems impossible. When a misfolded prion protein encounters a correctly folded one, it forces it to misfold too. It's contagious. A chain reaction of structural corruption spreading through your brain tissue, destroying cells, leaving behind sponge-like holes where functioning neurons used to be. When humans eat the meat or nervous tissue of an infected animal, those prions can cross into the human brain and begin the same process. The human version is called variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It starts with memory problems, personality changes, difficulty with coordination, then rapid cognitive decline, then complete neurological collapse. There is no treatment, no cure, no way to stop it once it starts. And because prions aren't alive, you can't kill them. They survive cooking, they survive sterilization. Once they're in the tissue, they're in the tissue. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. While the variant form linked to mad cow disease is devastating enough, the original form of CJD is in some ways even more mysterious, because it can emerge spontaneously, with no known cause, in anyone. Your brain is an extraordinarily complex system, billions of cells communicating constantly through precisely coordinated chemical signals. CJD disrupts that coordination at the most fundamental level. The misfolded prion spreads silently. Patients often show no symptoms at all until the disease has already caused irreversible damage. Then, typically within months, everything unravels at once. Memory disintegrates. Personality disappears. Muscle spasms become uncontrollable. The ability to speak goes. The ability to move goes. The ability to recognize loved ones goes. The average time from the first symptom to death is 4 to 6 months. Researchers have spent decades trying to understand CJD. They still don't fully know why the spontaneous form occurs. The brain essentially destroys itself in a process that medicine cannot interrupt. It remains one of the most unsettling open questions in all of neuroscience. The brain-eating amoeba. The name sounds like something from a horror film. The reality is worse. Naegleria fowleri is a microscopic organism that lives in warm freshwater, lakes, rivers, hot springs. For the most part, it's harmless. Millions of people swim in water containing it every year without incident. But occasionally, under very specific conditions, it enters the body through the nose during swimming or diving. And from the nasal passage, it travels up the olfactory nerve, the nerve directly connecting your nose to your brain, and begins feeding on brain tissue. The infection it causes, primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, progresses with brutal speed. Severe headache, high fever, nausea, stiff neck, then confusion, then hallucinations, then death. From first symptom to death, the typical timeline is 3 to 7 days. The survival rate across all documented cases in history is less than 5%. Fewer than 5 people in every 100 survive. And the truly disturbing part, you can't tell by looking at water whether it's contaminated. Clear, beautiful, inviting water can harbor it just as easily as murky water. The only safe assumption is that no warm fresh water is completely safe. Fatal familial insomnia. Sleep deprivation is uncomfortable. Most of us have experienced a bad night or two.
But fatal familial insomnia is what happens when the ability to sleep doesn't just decline, it disappears entirely. This is a prion disease. Yes, another one. Caused by a genetic mutation that can be passed down through families. It begins with increasing difficulty sleeping. Mild at first. Annoying. Then, the insomnia becomes total. No sleep at all. Not a single hour. And as sleep disappears, so does everything else. The human brain cannot function without sleep. Within weeks, hallucinations begin. Vivid, unshakable, impossible to distinguish from reality. Then, complete psychological breakdown. Then physical deterioration. The body's autonomic systems, the ones that regulate temperature, heart rate, blood pressure without conscious effort, begin to malfunction. The average time from the first signs of insomnia to death is 12 to 18 months. Patients are typically fully conscious and aware throughout most of this process, trapped inside a disintegrating mind and body with no possibility of rest, and no known treatment. There are fewer than 60 known families in the world that carry this mutation. In a very dark sense, they are the only ones who truly know what this disease is. Kuru. Here's where things get genuinely dark. In the mid-20th century, researchers investigating a remote tribe in Papua New Guinea encountered a disease unlike anything in the medical literature. People, predominantly women and children, were dying in large numbers from a progressive neurological illness. Tremors, loss of coordination, emotional instability, then complete physical collapse. The name given to this illness by the people it affected was Kuru, meaning trembling with fear.
And its source, when finally uncovered, was one of the most disturbing discoveries in the history of medicine: cannibalism. Specifically, the ritual consumption of the brains and nervous tissue of deceased family members, a funerary practice intended as an act of respect and mourning. The prions present in infected tissue were being transmitted directly to those who consumed it, launching the same chain reaction of neurological destruction we've already seen. Within roughly 12 months of the first tremors appearing, the disease progressed to total incapacitation and death. The practice eventually ended. The disease eventually disappeared. But it left behind a permanent record of what happens when prions find the most direct route possible into the human brain. Rabies. We've saved this one for last because in a list of diseases with high mortality rates, rabies stands entirely alone. Once symptoms appear, the fatality rate is essentially 100%. Not 90%, not 95, 100. There have been fewer than 30 documented cases of survival after symptomatic rabies infection in all of recorded medical history. 30 out of billions of infections. The virus enters through an animal bite, usually a dog, a bat, a fox. It moves slowly along your peripheral nerves toward your brain, which is why the incubation period can last weeks or even months. You feel nothing. You have no idea anything is wrong. Then it reaches the brain. The symptoms that follow read like something written for maximum terror, extreme agitation,
sudden bursts of uncontrollable rage, hypersensitivity to light, sound, and touch, paralysis of the throat muscles, which is what causes the famous inability to swallow.
Hydrophobia, a violent, irrational fear of water triggered by the pain of attempting to swallow anything at all. Then, foam at the mouth as saliva accumulates. Then, hallucinations. Then, full neurological failure. From the moment symptoms appear, you have between 2 and 10 days. During that time, your mind remains relatively intact, aware, conscious, experiencing all of it. And there is nothing modern medicine can reliably do to save you once that threshold is crossed. There is a vaccine. It works, but only if administered before symptoms begin. The window is everything. Miss it, and no treatment in existence changes the outcome. Polio. We'll end with a different kind of story. Not because polio is less serious, but because it represents something the others on this list do not. A disease that humanity actually fought back against and nearly defeated. Think of your spinal cord as the command center of your entire body. Every signal your brain sends to your muscles travels through it. Polio targets that command center directly. The virus enters through contaminated water or food, multiplies silently in your intestines, and then, in the worst cases, invades the nervous system and attacks the cells responsible for sending movement signals to your muscles. When those cells die, the muscles they control go silent, permanently. The paralysis is irreversible. There is no regeneration. Primarily affecting children under 5, a single infection could leave a child unable to walk for the rest of their life, or unable to breathe without mechanical assistance. At polio's peak, hundreds of thousands of children were paralyzed every single year worldwide. Parents kept their children indoors during summer months, called polio season, out of genuine terror. And then a vaccine came. In 1955, the Salk vaccine changed everything. Polio cases collapsed by 99% globally. The disease is now on the edge of complete eradication, existing in only a handful of locations in the entire world. It is the closest humanity has ever come to completely eliminating a disease that once terrified the world. And it's a reminder that as horrifying as everything on this list is, and it genuinely is, the story doesn't always end in defeat. Subscribe to Obscura Files. There's a lot more where this came from.